Good evening. I have 5 o'clock, so I'm going to get us started promptly here this evening. I would like to call this special meeting for the Des Moines Public Schools for Sunday, November 8th to order. Ms. Jenkins, please take the roll.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley? Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Cody?
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Here.
Ms. Martirano?
Here.
And Ms. Sawyer?
All right. Before I move us forward onto our agenda item, I just wanted to talk through some process with the board to see if this sounds amenable for how we might do this evening. I am thinking what we will do is we will allow Dr. Ahart to introduce the matter. We can take a motion on it. Well, before Dr. Ahart introduces it, we'll have our public comment. I do believe we only have, do we still have only 3 speakers signed up at this time, Ms. Jenkins?
Now 4.
4, okay. So what I was thinking was we might shorten our public comment from the normal 5 minutes on regular business items to do more of like a public forum like we do prior to our meetings at 3 minutes. Does that process sound amenable, or do any board members have objections to that? And I do see we have Ms. Bradley and Ms. Sawyer with us now.
Perfect.
Okay. Board members, if I'm not hearing any objections, I think what we'll do is shorten public comment to 3 minutes so that we can keep this meeting brief. I'm also going to recommend that after Dr. Ahart presents the matter, we take a motion, and then, or, after Dr. Ahart presents the matter, we can, take a couple minutes for board questions. We can take a motion and then do maybe 15 minutes of discussion fully as a board on the motion, and maybe 3 to 5 minutes each for questions, similar to how we've done this in the past during these meetings to kind of keep things moving along. Does that sound good, or does anyone have any objections to that?
This is Terry. I have no objection.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson. Okay, great. Then I will go ahead and ask Ms. Jenkins to open up our public comment on our single agenda item this evening, which is a recommendation from Dr. Ahart regarding learning modality. Ms. Jenkins, if you'd please.
Mr. Jason Baker?
Good evening, board members and Dr. Ahart. First of all, I want you to know how thankful I am for all of the time you all have devoted to the discussions surrounding COVID, and some of you for taking time to actually answer my many emails. While I may not have agreed with how you have handled every decision, I greatly respect knowing that you have made decisions based on what you believe to be best for our community. Tonight, our current reality is terrifying. Yet again, we are meeting virtually, which has very negative optics. Why are you still not willing to take the same risks you're telling students and staff that we have to take? I understand part of Dr. Ahart's recommendation tonight is suspending the high school's hybrid instructional model, yet keeping elementary and middle school in buildings until Monday, November 16th. Dr. Schaefer has been telling you things would get worse. Last Tuesday, Dr. Schaefer all but told you, while Dr. Ahart directly told you, we should be out of buildings at that point. Dr. Schaefer predicted things would triple in the very near future. It seems as though you have chosen to simply wait and see if science is real, and now that you decide it is, you're willing to continue sending elementary and middle school staff and students into harm's way. I believe the attendance metrics on our district website to be greatly unreliable because of how they are actually being calculated. I've gotten information from administrators that alludes to this, and have heard some of you are even questioning this yourselves. Please don't force me back into classrooms where there has either been confirmed cases or students are absent because their families haven't yet tested them. Last week, I invited you all into buildings for unscheduled visits, and I heard of none. Now I'm choosing to assume positive intentions that you just didn't have time, or I just didn't hear about your visits. However, if you stayed away because you were scared, how dare you? Again, I invite all of you to make unscheduled visits. I ask for unscheduled because if visits were to be scheduled, you probably wouldn't see what reality actually is in our buildings. I once again plead you to move elementary and middle school to virtual learning effective as of midnight tonight so we can insulate ourselves from any further exposure. Thank you again for taking time out of your personal lives again for us tonight, but please let's make it worth it. Sincerely, Jason Baker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our next speaker?
Mark Joyce.
Thank you for your time tonight. I've emailed all of you actually multiple times, but in particular today earlier. I just thought this was important enough to join you in person tonight. My name is Mark Joyce. I've lived in the district as a resident for over 20 years now. I have a senior and a sophomore at Roosevelt High School, and my wife, Christy, has taught in the district since 1997. If you caught my email today, you know that I have two main concerns about your actions tonight on term 2 high school hybrid start or not to start, to remain virtually into term 2. One is compliance. And I know we've talked a lot about this. I have spent hours watching your meetings, your workshops. We are in a significant hole. And I just think you need to give the waiver process a shot, to apply to the state for a waiver first, get their response. I mean, to apply for the waiver while simultaneously taking action tonight that the waiver might not allow, to me, is not very diplomatic at best, and just another hostile move with the state at worst. I think to do that in advance of a decision by the state is the wrong direction and a problem. The number 2 thing is work schedules and family schedules. Dr. Ahart from the beginning, and I know things change daily, he's promised an advance notice. So when people were gearing up for a set schedule, there would be a little bit of grace so that it would soften the impact on work schedules, transportation schedules, et cetera. So to me, in order to live up to that, Dr. Ahart, you could request a waiver from the state. I think they turn that around in something like 48 hours. That would put you at your Wednesday notice for Monday implementation. And you have a regularly scheduled board meeting for the 17th. So you could act at that time as well. I realize this could mean you only get 1 week of hybrid high school. I realize that. But on many of these meetings, you've laid out how prepared your facility personnel are, how prepared your staff is, the mitigation plans you've implemented. And, Kevin Biggs assures me every Friday and sometimes on Saturday that Roosevelt is prepared for this and ready to go. So I guess in closing, I would just say, Kristen, Dwana, Rob, Terry, Kim, Kelly, Kaylin, you've been consistent. I'm pretty sure I know where you're at. But give it a week.
30 seconds.
Extend some diplomacy to the state. I've heard you refer, Dr. Ahart, many times to your lobby team in the state. If there are federal resources coming down to help with COVID, and if the state is going to make decisions in January, your lobby team has to play the hand that you deal them. Please don't make it worse tonight. Give the waiver a chance to roll out this week and act accordingly Wednesday or at your regularly scheduled meeting next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Sorry, I couldn't get to my mute button. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Jenkins, can you please call our next speaker?
Nicole Cable.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Cable. I'm the school nurse at Roosevelt High School. The last week has been one of the most difficult weeks we've had thus far, and I wish I could tell you it was only about the election and the waiting, but it wasn't. It was about the fact that we have exponential growth in Iowa and in Polk County in relation to COVID cases. Every school nurse, not only in our district, but every surrounding metro district, spent record hours this last week having conversations about isolation and quarantine with staff, students, and family. We have more and more affected individuals in our district, in our community, and in our county as a whole. On Thursday, the governor held a press conference and offered no new measures to help reduce our numbers. at the same time that there was a transition going on in their data systems, so they could not even access data that we needed to have. Our hybrid plan and mitigation measures are built on razor-thin margins. If our positivity rate were 8%, we might be able to hold the line for a little while. But with numbers of individuals affected growing by the minute, our margins, which are razor-thin, will not safely hold. We cannot hold this line. Helen Eddy, the director of the Polk County Health Department, issued a video on Friday afternoon asking for everyone's help to try and stem the tide that is growing. We have gone from positivity of 12% last week alone to over 16 today. The state has gone from 14 to over 19 today. If we could see the fire that is this forest fire of COVID, as Dr. Osterholm likes to talk about it, we would realize the flames are everywhere and they are at our doorstep. It is huge. And I wish I could tell you that we could beat it back in a couple of days and be in good shape, but we cannot. This is going to take weeks to turn the tide. If we bring students together, thousands of people together in our high schools this week, we will be exposing more and more people and contributing to the problem and endangering the lives of many. We need to not go into hybrid for high schools. We need to remove hybrid for our lower grades. We need to be aware of the fact that the fire is large and is right here, and we do not have adequate resources, public health or other healthcare in our community to be able to adequately control this. We are talking about people's lives, and in the face of exponential growth, it is incumbent upon all of us to do everything we possibly can to try and turn the tide. We don't want to lose somebody and face that loss as
30
Downey
seconds.
has faced the loss of somebody this weekend, as West Des Moines faced the loss of somebody earlier this month, as Des Moines faced the loss of somebody at the start of the school year. Please, please take action now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cable. Ms. Jenkins, I believe we have one more speaker. Is that correct?
Yes, Marsha Reedburn.
Good evening. I would agree with Mr. Joyce as far as us not making a change without getting the waiver. I have been in the district for over 40 years. I have 5 students in the Des Moines Public Schools today. I have 3 that are in the elementary level, and their hybrid method is working well. I understand that the numbers are rising, but we have people all over the city, the county, the state doing as they please. I don't believe that it's our in-school learning that's raising the numbers. I wear a mask everywhere I go out of courtesy for everyone else, but people don't do that. We have hundreds of people at soccer fields every weekend, hundreds of people at ballparks every weekend, people going to bars and doing whatever they want to, knowing they can't social distance. Our school is social distancing, and the elementary children are not learning when they're not in school. So at the sacrifice of those children who want to be there and their teachers want them to be there, are the numbers all in any of them in our district raising the numbers? Or we have lots of school children that are having to quarantine or teachers that are having to quarantine. Some of the schools that are having those issues outside of our district are going full time. So they have all the students in there and probably makes it impossible to social distance. We're doing it well in our elementary school, and the children cannot learn online. I have 2 of my high school students are struggling to pass classes doing it virtually. So if you don't care about their education, then let's just cancel school completely and let them go on with their life instead of all this stress of having to worry about failing a class and not being able to graduate because someone there might get sick. We might get sick anywhere. In the grocery store, anytime I go somewhere, they say, have you been exposed? I don't know, because people come in all the time without masks. So everybody in the city and in the county is jeopardizing everybody. I don't think it's an in-school learning. And I don't think that it has to be an all or nothing. I think if we have the gall to just shut us down again without getting the waiver and without looking at the high school differently from the grade school and the middle school, we're doing a disservice to every student in the district. And it's disappointing. It's disappointing.
30 seconds.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Reedburn, for your comments. Ms. Jenkins, do we have any other speakers?
We do not.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and close public comment and ask Dr. Ahart to introduce his recommendation this evening.
Thank you, Chair. Polk County is experiencing exponential growth in the spread of COVID-19. We exceeded the state's positivity metric of 15% yesterday, and it is expected to continue to grow, with case rates growing exponentially in the coming weeks. The hospitals in Polk County are in a state of emergency with increased patient load and diminished bed and staff availability. The community metrics established by the board indicating fully remote instruction have been exceeded. We have more than 4 times the number of new cases per 100,000 over 7 days than the minimum defined by the metrics for virtual instruction, and the positivity rate is over 6 points higher than the minimum. Our absenteeism numbers are squarely in the second category of hybrid, and the staff absenteeism rate is expected to be in the virtual range before the end of the week. In July, conditions were bad, but not nearly this extreme. In meetings in July, at board meetings, members said things like COVID-19 impacts people of color at higher rates. I won't stand for anything that puts our students and staff in danger. We fight this. Or it's an impossible situation. We have competing values. In-person is the best, our most desired state, but we can't put our families at increased risk. Or I would be willing to go to the wall on this issue. The state is introducing politics when safety should prevail. What the real public health experts have predicted has and continues to happen. In March, this was the time of year that we were expecting to face the second wave of the disease, when we were discussing having to be ready to pivot back to remote learning. But by May, Dr. Osterholm and many others said that the wave metaphor was no longer apt. Instead, the more appropriate metaphor is a forest fire. The people are the trees, and if meaningful measures are not taken to control the fire, it will continue to burn so long as there are trees to burn. Meaningful measures have not been taken, so the fire is raging. So what has changed? We have hundreds of sick students and staff. Nearly 200 have tested positive since the first day of school. We have hundreds of staff and students and staff currently on quarantine, despite not being allowed to follow best practice and isolating those that have been exposed, which would drive that number up much higher. Like our hospitals, our staff are being stretched thin, which creates more susceptibility to the disease, diminishes the quality of instruction, and increases exposure to the virus for both students and staff. What has not changed? The unknowns. I don't know how we're going to navigate the gap of in-person instruction that the DE is requiring this year. I know that we've had to navigate budget challenges every year, and I've been in the district because of insufficient supplemental state aid. And I know that we cannot require students to attend school after our regular school year ends. And I know that we'll provide as much additional in-person instruction as we can when it is safe to do so. I don't know how we get around the inconvenience to families that count on their children being in school so that they can go to work. I don't know, as a district, how we control the COVID-19 conditions in our community to create the conditions to give us a fighting chance at conducting in-person instruction without making our community conditions worse, without causing avoidable pain, suffering, and possible loss of life for our staff, students, and their families. There are a few things that I do know. We are not the cause of this pandemic. We have been as proactive as any public entity in our response to it. We do not have the authority to ensure what needs to happen in our community to bring it under control actually happens. I know that our families, students, and staff are suffering socially and emotionally. I know that firsthand, but it is a false narrative to say that social emotional conditions will be fine as long as we have students and staff in school under these conditions. In-person school is not the same as in-person school as in years past, and the loss caused by the disease itself is a tremendous source of suffering. Our team is reaching back out to our community partners with a special focus on our higher education partners at DMACC, Drake, and Grandview to scale up efforts to provide one-on-one and small group tutoring for our students with need from undergraduate and graduate students. As one of our board members said earlier this summer, we are in an impossible situation. Protecting the health and safety of our students and staff and our greater community is squarely at odds with the rules we're supposed to follow. We need to decide who we're going to be. Because everyone else is doing it does not mean we don't know better. Our management limitations 2.1 and 2.3, treatment of students and treatment of staff, have been on my mind persistently for months. I'm not sure what in those policies will matter if I cannot keep our students and staff safe. We have all been under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure in different forms since March. We're all suffering from COVID-19 fatigue. We are receiving little cooperation from those in positions to help. None of these factors, though, change how dangerous this disease is, how much we know it kills, and how much we know it causes long-term health impacts to many that recover, and how out of control it is in our community right now. Please know that I do not take making this recommendation lightly, but I firmly believe it is time to act.
Thank you, Dr. Ehart. I'm going to give board members, 3 to 5 minutes here to ask questions relating to either the process of your recommendation or, the metrics or what you're seeing in schools and buildings prior to moving forward with a motion. Board colleagues, does anyone like to begin, or should I just go through alphabetically, or how? Mr. Barron, would you like to start us if we go alphabetically, or would you like another minute to pass?
No, I can ask a couple questions.
Okay, go ahead.
So for the purpose of everybody that's listening and watching here, Tom, your recommendation is that we apply for a waiver, which would go into the state tomorrow. And the waivers are kept at 2 weeks of virtual learning. So theoretically, that would be, would that be for this week and next week for all of, well, it wouldn't be for this week, right?
Yeah, it would be for this week. I would submit the waiver this evening if approved, and expect to get a quick turnaround from the state.
Well, I guess my question is
hopefully by end of day tomorrow.
My question is on high school. So high school, we're proposing to delay the start of in-person set for Tuesday. So in terms of state ramifications, we would ask for the waiver to start Tuesday for high school, but then K-8 would stay in for the week. And so then I guess what I'm trying to ascertain here is that would it be a staggered 2-week period for high school starting this week and K-8 starting the week to follow, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I know that's a concern of folks that are wrapped up in the ramifications with the state. So if we got the waiver, those days would be counted as those days would be okay with the state. We would not be facing sanctions for those days.
Correct.
Okay. My understanding of the information that Dr. Schaefer provided us 5 days ago was the cases per 100,000, which is the most significant and reliable metric of the state of the virus here, is either tripled or quadrupled since we made the decision to go back to in-person learning. That she has seen no signs that we've peaked and have started to descend from those numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you aware of any other assistance coming our way by any third parties, akin to closing down other things or limiting the potential for this virus spreading by folks that are not directly aligned with Des Moines Public Schools?
If I understand your question correctly, I think my answer would be no.
I think you understood my question correctly. The cavalry is not coming to help us here. Well, So then for me, the challenge comes with what seems like an obvious house on fire situation here. But then the last question I'll ask you is the most compelling and potentially the compelling enough reason for me not to move back to virtual right now is the quality of education that we can count on for our kids in the virtual environment. Can you give me and give the community some assurance about the quality of that virtual learning environment relative to what's been happening for the 9-12 that have been in throughout and the K-8 that have been we're in for part of this year already?
Yeah, well, the virtual experience for those that are currently in hybrid certainly would be improved if we went back to virtual, because a lot more synchronous learning could take place. As I mentioned in my comments, we're reaching back out to our community partners, but putting a special focus on our higher ed partners to look for additional supports, both virtual and in person, for those students for whom we identify virtual being a particular barrier to their learning. We're just going to continue to cast a broader and broader net to bring more resources in so that more and more students can have in-person contact and regular check-ins with adults that can support them in their learning.
Okay, those are my questions. I look forward to hearing what my colleagues ask.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Ms. Bradley?
Having a few internet issues, so if you don't hear a question, let me know. I might have to switch the way that I'm on this call. We've been making a lot of predictions about what the future would look like based off of the numbers considering COVID. What do we know, or are we true that if we continue in a virtual state for our students, what is the academic future for our students? Because I am concerned about the impact that this has on our students, especially our student population of color. Virtual is just not a viable option for many of students. I mean, not just students of color, those who have IEPs, 504s, ELLs, who are 2 years behind in reading and math. So as we're predicting what COVID could be in our future, what are we predicting our future could be like as a district if we continue in the mode of virtual instruction?
Well, clearly we took a step back last spring when we were forced out of our schools and had limited authority to introduce new learning, and we're in the process of getting those who couldn't be connected electronically and getting devices in hands. We did have everybody connected with and equipped with a device this year. That being said, certainly, and as I said in my opening comments, in person is by far the best mode, especially for our youngest learners. And so if we have an extended period of remote, that certainly will have, regardless of the best efforts of our outstanding staff, that will certainly have a deleterious effect on what would have, compared to what would have happened had we had all of our students in person. There's no two ways about that. We continue to look for partnerships with our faith community, with our higher ed community. And as you know, before we got into the hybrid, we were serving all told over 2,000 students that weren't signed up for fully virtual in person, and we would continue to extend those efforts beyond as we identify more and more students for whom virtual learning has proved to be particularly problematic. So it's not ideal. We would not make the progress that we would have otherwise made. I'm confident in saying that. Not happy to say that, but I believe that would be the case. But I would also say the more we can be planful about transitions, as I'm attempting to be here, the less loss we have due to unplanned transitions and whiplashing back and forth between modalities.
I'm hearing from high school, and so you can correct me if I'm wrong, some of these virtual classes that they're really high. A teacher reached out to me. They're going to have their lowest is 47 students. Their highest is going to be 50 students in a virtual class. Are high schools doing a different type of model? Is it just one teacher is teaching virtual and one teacher is teaching hybrid? What is high school? What model are they using for learning with students?
Well, as we transition into hybrid, the scheduling changes for everyone. So not for everyone, but for most of our staff. So we've tried to number one, make sure as much as possible that we create small in-person sections so that social distancing can happen. And so the balance isn't perfect by any stretch. I think we've done a very respectable job of balancing those in-person students so that we can have some modicum of physical distancing, but that also creates additional pressure on those that are just virtual. So the numbers are certainly more favorable when we're in the hybrid on a student-teacher ratio basis in hybrid than it is for virtual. So some of those classes are certainly larger than they would be in a fully virtual.
What does the subpool look like right now?
Well, we had prior to rolling into the implementation of hybrid, I believe we had about 50 subs hired for work every day that were assigned to buildings, and we've had 30 more join that group. That being said, with increases in absenteeism, about 40% of our staff absenteeism right now is due to either isolation or quarantine due to COVID, which has really created an uptick in absenteeism. We do not have enough subs to cover every teacher absence. So we're sort of triaging using first building staff and then district staff to make sure that we have coverage for every class and every supervision area. That changes from time to time. I mean, some buildings are in more need some days than others, but as we look forward, and I mentioned that our attendance metrics for staff will, by the end of next week, I'm projecting that they will be in the fully virtual mode because we're at over 6% absenteeism over 5% absenteeism for staff. And what you see when you look at the data is that the number has been steadily increasing, and then it holds at a pretty high number because with 40% of the absences being multiple day absences, that creates a heavier strain on the system. And as those numbers of quarantined and positive cases go up, each of those absences tends to be, about a 2-week absence. And so that stretches those resources further each day, because if you add another absence, it's not just a 1 or 2 day absence because of, the flu or something. It's probably a much lengthier absence because of the requirements of quarantining and isolation.
Okay. Kirsten, I do have more questions, but just for sake of time, I want to be fair in making sure that my board colleagues are able to ask questions. So if there is time at the end, I will come back with more questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to maybe follow along some of the line of questioning that both my board colleagues have already shared. So I just want to confirm the question from Mr. Barron regarding the potential for the waiver. So high school was scheduled to start on Tuesday. K-8 is already in session. So were we to proceed, we would again delay high school return and move into K-8 return to honor our notification plans to families, and that would impact middle school the following week. That's correct?
middle school and elementary. Yeah, the following week.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay. Dr. Ahart, can you talk a little bit, and I know that you shared some data with the board earlier today, but can you talk about any concerns that data brings up for you relative to our students and their attendance in both the virtual and hybrid environments? And that means their participation. I'm hearing a lot of conflicting information and stories, so I'd like to hear from you, your assessment of what our attendance numbers are looking like, and if there are any concerns or implications with regard to that might challenge us to rethink our virtual modality.
Yeah, so attendance has been a particular challenge this year in that taking attendance for virtual, depending on what level, becomes a bit of a challenge, and then the attendance for in-person is 2 or 3 days a week for those in-person students, and then a lot of those students are being served asynchronously on their virtual days. So the attendance picture is I would say a little blurry. But it certainly is a challenge. I'm not satisfied with our attendance rates, and we're constantly looking for ways that we can both get the data in more timely so that we can react in a more timely way, but we're also seeing a pretty large increase over the last 2 weeks, especially, of students who are absent because of COVID. So that's driving the numbers up, as our data shows, considerably higher than it would normally have been in a normal year, compared to where we were the last 2 years, for sure. And then we don't have, unfortunately, because of the timing of this meeting, we don't have as good of comparisons for student achievement from this time this year to this time last year or before. We have pretty decent data for elementary reading, which, as you all know, we anticipated that being a bit lower, especially because of our real struggles last spring, given the situation we were thrown into, and we're not certainly where we would like to be there. High school, middle school is a little more difficult to make heads to tails or heads to head comparisons, partly because a good chunk of our students have been, or almost all of our students have been virtual for all but the last 2 weeks. And so we can't really tell what difference in person is making. So yeah, it's a foggy picture, I would say, but one that is certainly something that we need to continue to work on and push forward in finding more creative and inventive ways to ensure that we're keeping everyone engaged, regardless of our learning modality, until we're back into fully in person.
So this is not meant to in any way be critical. I think it really is intended to really sort of lift up what I think the obvious is relative to not only attendance, but also the achievement challenges that you've already recognized and what the FAST scores are telling us. But recognizing that attendance and participation and academic achievement are things that we will continue to face in the virtual mode. And since you're recommending that we go to full virtual, what are the stopgap measures, the other instructional measures, the other engagement measures that you're recommending as the complement to your recommendation for moving to virtual?
So part of the moving to virtual puts us in a better, arguably a better situation in that regard, as it relates to both instruction and attendance. In fully virtual, there's a lot more synchronous learning happening, which puts teachers in a much better position to be continually engaging with their students over the course of a day, and actually provides more if you will, synchronous instruction over the course of a week than in the hybrid model. What we're seeing, a particular challenge with engagement, are those students in hybrid on the days when they're in the virtual setting has been our single biggest pressure point in terms of engagement and attendance. So that's one piece. The other piece, as I had mentioned before, doubling down on our community partnerships and putting a special emphasis moving forward on reaching out to the undergraduates primarily, but also graduate students at our local colleges and universities to provide additional either in-person or virtual one-on-one and small group instructional support that we just aren't capable of doing with the number of staff that we have available at any given time over the course of a day.
You know, I think that for me, the practicality of remaining virtual and our district meeting the needs of our students are not aligned in a way that gives me great confidence that we have the tools in place, the measures in place, the staff in place, and the other actions in place that really allow us to fully and completely meet the needs of a district that is a large percentage ELL, as well as a large percentage high poverty students in the virtual setting. That's where I am challenged the greatest, and where I feel like we continue to fail our students. That's not an indictment on us, this district, it's just what we're faced with. But I do really believe that I have to consider the implications of virtual on the teaching and learning needs of our students in a way that allows me to feel confident that if I were to support going in that direction, that the needs of our student population could be met. And I'm not convinced of that. I do have another question relative to the schedule,
Ms. Caldwell,
Dr. Ahart. Yes,
this will probably be your last question.
that's fine. That's fine. My question goes to 9-12 high school. And I know that we're not, a district that is in place because we want to meet the activities and sports needs of our students. But I do think that especially for our high school students, that's something that we need to take into consideration. And I know that we have a number of high school students whose own families have invested resources and have supported other students to make them eligible for high school competitions, state competitions that are coming up. We also have a football game that's scheduled between two of our high schools that's coming up. And were we to delay high school or the start of high school this week, I believe that those would be interrupted. Is that not the case, or am I not understanding that correctly?
No, you are understanding that correctly.
Okay. Again, I think that there are a variety of ways that we serve our students and we serve our families. Activities and athletics is one of many. But I do think that we shouldn't discount the implications of people who have invested in students, quite frankly, who have invested their time and resources in preparing for competitions that, were we to make a decision time, they would be able to take advantage of full and complete participation, whatever that means. And I think that we are preempting that should we decide to go virtual in a way that doesn't honor their commitment to what they've attempted to do. So I do have a few more questions, Madam Chair, but I'll defer.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson. Mr. Cody.
Okay, first, I just want to start, when we voted in the fall to start our tiered reopening, our goal was to open up slowly and see what happens. Right now, we're seeing what happens. Our teachers are sick, our students are sick, our families are sick. Our mitigation efforts are spotty in places. One thing that I've been concerned about from the jump is when our teachers and staff get sick, which was inevitable, we're going to have a lot of time covering those classes. And right now, whichever modality we're in, if we don't have educators leading those groups, we're not getting a top class education regardless. So with all of that said, I do have a couple of questions. Going back to identifying the students that might still be served in person, can you talk about a little bit about the criteria that we're looking at? Is it purely academic? Is it some family circumstance stuff? What are you looking at?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're looking. It varies a little bit for our special education students. Most of those that are being served in person, that was a result of reworking their IEPs in light of a fully virtual, to make sure that we're providing the least restrictive environment and compliance with their IEP. And then that's really kind of the same process for students with a 504. And then next priority was those students for whom data told us that they weren't getting, they weren't engaging, they weren't connecting. Some of those are ELL, but certainly not entirely. And then the other, so that's one group, large group, and then we have students who are taking courses at Central Campus for dual credit, which requires a certain amount of seat time so that they can earn college credit, and that has been set up in a way that, as it was actually originally in our original Return to Learn plan, so that we can have very ample social distancing and students don't have to forego those experiences because of remote learning. And then we have a handful of others like Orchard Place and our Focus program, where students are in person full time.
Yeah, well, so this afternoon before this meeting, I had a really good conversation with one of our teachers he described to me pretty thoroughly the struggles that a lot of our high school African-American male particularly were having with virtual learning. And I would feel more comfortable if we could put an emphasis on some of those really large families in a small space or whatever, just to get them out of that really challenging environment. My next question then involves, if we were to return to virtual learning, is there some sort of process, or process is the wrong word, but would there be something set up to kind of coach our teachers through this? A lot of the horror stories we heard where, my kid just has 3 things on a checklist and doesn't do anything all week. I would imagine, just like in any regular classroom, some teachers are more skilled than others, some are more comfortable than others. What is coaching up the teachers who are struggling going to look like if we were to go virtual?
Well, that's a good question. So we've retained our instructional coaches, and so their work is looking different, a bit different under these new circumstances at present. A lot of them are spending significant amount of their time covering classes and not actually performing their coaching roles because of utilizing all available staff. But we did invest. We delayed the start of the school year by a number of days and front loaded much of our professional development at the beginning of the year to buy us some time and hopefully working something out for a longer term solution for how we were going to get to do instruction this year. But that's, you know, largely the role of our instructional coaches and then our APs and principals. So, you know, it's incumbent upon each building's leadership team to be looking at the data and identifying where those you know, sticky wickets are, as it were, and then working out a coaching plan to help support the teachers appropriately for whatever the barrier is that they're facing. And like you said, you know, everybody has a different, you know, comes to the table with a different skill set in that regard, and what's required in a virtual setting is something for which we do have quite a bit of in-house expertise, but it's certainly not distributed evenly throughout our staff as you would ideally have if you were trying to function in fully remote. So we're actively working on connecting, you know, the folks with the right skill set and expertise to help provide support to those that are finding a particular challenge in this environment and not finding their way through it.
Yeah, I wonder if we could just maybe emphasize that some of these coaches and administrators and whatever can actually get in and look at the virtual space once in a while instead of just the data. Those can be two different pictures sometimes.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess my last question then involves attendance. We've heard some people saying that, you know, particularly with these hybrid kids, they get marked as present if they just log in once a day or whatever. How would the actual taking of attendance look different if we went back to the fully virtual? And I just forgot what it looked like at the beginning, I guess is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we have somebody on the line who could answer that more specifically, because to be honest with you, I'm not sure that I can give a completely comprehensive answer to that, although it's a very fair question.
Mr. Cody, I'm happy to answer that. Can you repeat your question again?
Yeah, basically, what does taking attendance look like in a fully virtual space? When is a kid considered there besides just saying I'm here?
Yeah, that's been, as Dr. Ahart referenced, that continues to be a challenge for us. Obviously, we are looking at not just logging in, but also students submitting evidence. We're doing our best to monitor learning and not just look at logins. We certainly track logins, but we're frankly more interested in are they submitting evidence of learning and what feedback is being provided. But that continues to be a challenge because you know, as Dr. Ahart has already laid out, we're struggling to get regular submission of evidence from every student, which is not completely different than in a normal setting. But it presents additional challenges here. So I can't speak to the technical side of how that actually gets coded on the back end. I don't know if somebody else can speak more specifically to that, but I can tell you where we are putting our emphasis.
And I'd imagine that when a teacher's attention isn't so divided, it'd be much easier to get a good read.
For sure.
Yeah, well, that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Mr. Cody. I am going to allow myself to go last so Ms. Bradley can keep time for me, and I'll move on to Ms. Martorano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering how many cases have been traced to in-school COVID exposure?
Yeah, I don't have that's a good question, and one I don't have an exact answer to. I know that we've had a handful, but I think most of the cases we cannot attribute to exposure at school or at work, although there certainly are some cases.
And currently, if a teacher is quarantined due to exposure, whether it's in the building or outside of the building, are those teachers teaching virtually? So when we discuss staff attendance, I'm just curious, if I'm quarantined to exposure, but I don't have any symptoms, am I required to be absent from my duties, or am I being asked to complete duties virtually?
You're being asked if capable to complete your duties virtually, but then we have to find someone to provide supervision in person, if that makes sense.
It does. Is that the same for students? If a student has exposure and is required to quarantine, are we asking that they participate in classes during that quarantine time?
We are.
Are we able to, if we see, as we're looking at our building level in data, and if we see a concern at a building, are we able to close one particular building, or I shouldn't say close, are we able to transition to virtual learning for a particular building without a waiver approval, or are we required to request a waiver even if it is a building level or a much smaller scale, not district-wide concern?
Yeah, for a building or campus level, that does require an approved waiver. We are allowed with authorization from county health to close a classroom or 2 classrooms for a period of 2 days without getting authorization from the state.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to make note that after hearing comments from Ms. Bradley regarding possible class sizes of upwards of 50 students for our virtual classrooms, I would imagine that would be a struggle for a teacher to maintain required response and interaction with students. So I am concerned by that number. I am also concerned by the data we received today regarding student achievement. Currently, 55% of all high school students are earning a D or F in 1 or more classes. 68% of high school male students are in that category, and 69% of ELL students are in that category. I am really taken aback by those numbers, and looking at, I'm weighing a great deal right now, but currently student achievement is going to be weighed heavily in my decision this evening.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Dr. Ahart, in all of your, or in your thought process around applying for a waiver, let's hold off and things like that, have you gone granular? Have you looked at building level data to determine if we're having issues in certain buildings and looked at why don't we just close certain buildings and or even classrooms as opposed to the full district?
I've not, I mean, I've looked at the data. Closing a building would be, or reverting a building to fully virtual does take a waiver. But frankly, we really haven't had the data to speak to, any particular building being more in need than most of the other buildings for a 2-day, all we can do is a 2-day temporary for a particular classroom or classrooms. And, as we were told by Polk County Public Health, choose your 2 days wisely, because the districts that have done that oftentimes wish they would have waited, because things are worse when they come back, because they didn't have a full sense of how much exposure had happened prior to making the call. So in trying to prevent it, the call was made too late, and then they didn't have another avenue to close the classroom down when they learned that more of the students were actually positive than what they thought when they asked for the temporary shutdown.
Okay, so we haven't really looked at if we're having hot spots
Yeah, we
within
have.
certain buildings. Okay.
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Yeah. But what
Okay.
I'm saying is that you know, it's pretty fluid, and I can't, you know, I can't really single out one building and say that you can make an argument that this building is a particular hotspot compared to, you know, compared to the others. What I'm, you know, what's really driving this recommendation isn't a concern about a particular building. It's really just looking at the very steady increase over the last 2 weeks of positive cases in both students and staff, and a concurrent increase in students and staff being quarantined due to exposure, and what, you know, and then the rising conditions in the community, and what are expected to be continue to get, you know, to grow exponentially for the next few weeks, and then possibly, you know, through Thanksgiving, and trying to avoid having a disaster prior to reacting to a disaster.
Okay, so we're making assumptions then. I mean, we're just saying, based on what we're seeing in community, we believe this to be the case, and so we're gonna shut the district down. Because I was speaking to a teacher today, and it was, you know, what she seemed to describe was that it wasn't terrible in her building, and there wasn't a lot of spread and a lot of cases in her building, actually. And so that's why I was like, well, then I'm wondering why we would close the full district if we're not seeing it in every building. So that's just a comment, I guess. And I don't know if you want to even address that question. I'm trying to grasp that for myself to understand.
Yeah, I don't think we have, we may have a building right now without a case, but I don't think we've had a building without a case, or at least several quarantines since the start of in person. So, but like I said, there's not been a particular hotspot. What we are seeing, though, is a pretty steady and rapid increase in the number of cases and the number of quarantines, and knowing how much virus is out there right now because of the case count in the community and the positivity rate, and what the hospitals are telling us with their diminished capacity. And as I, shared last week, trying to determine when we make this move, and I think now is the right time to make the move where we can, if we take action now, we can avoid a lot of unnecessary infection and illness.
Okay, so, okay, and I asked because I know we have districts surrounding us that have made decisions today to close buildings, and so they're not closing districts, they're closing buildings. So I just wanted to ask that and clarify that question. And earlier you were talking about the difference with attendance in hybrid and virtual, and how you're seeing things not so great with the hybrid, but that virtual, it's a little bit better. Why might that be, I guess? And I'm trying to understand, because everybody's different, right? Like, this is what we discussed at our last board meeting. Every building is not the same when it comes to hybrid. My daughter's in a space where it's synchronous, regardless if she is in the classroom or if she's at home learning. It is synchronous learning with her teacher. That does not seem to be the case across the district. So I'm trying to understand why, if kids is it because of that asynchronous piece that kids are just not logging on, and that's why hybrid's a little bit more of a challenge because of that, and they are not synchronous anymore? I'm trying to understand. They're still at home learning, so why would there be such a big difference?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think that moving from fully virtual, where you had kind of the same routine day after day, and then moving to hybrid, in person obviously feels a lot different. And so I think they think about their virtual time differently, especially if they're not getting synchronous, as much synchronous instruction. So that's our presumption that because they're not getting as much synchronous instruction when they're on their virtual days during hybrid, that they're, for a number of reasons, not engaging as timely.
Okay.
And again, I just want to offer, sorry to interrupt, sorry. this is a new venture for all of us, and we have still very limited experience in hybrid. So I'm a little cautious to make too many declarations of why things are so, because we have had 3 weeks in elementary and 2 weeks in middle school. So it's a pretty small sample.
Okay. And I think I also spoke with the staff member, Kaylin, that you had spoke to earlier, about what's happening with our African-American youth in our district. So what is the plan to make sure that we're not losing our kids in this process?
Well, we have in place what we have in place, and we're going to, as I've said prior, to continue to look for additional community partners to help us with that effort. Part of the challenge that we've had is starting the year and then shifting. That's kind of required a lot of coordination and planning, and the more we shift around like that, kind of the harder it is to have some of these brand new things in place. So our next effort is to really double down on our existing partnerships with the higher ed community to see what kind of a broader net we can cast, and what additional structures we can put in place to provide our students most struggling with that virtual and staying engaged with school, to provide more personal support, either one-on-one or in small groups, to ensure that we're keeping everyone actively engaged, encouraged, motivated, and coached.
Real quick, another question, because I feel like I was going to say that's. Yep.
I was going to say
I just have one more question I was going to try and squeeze in quick, and I'm hoping it's a fast answer.
If it's going to be a fast answer, then yes, let's try to squeeze it in quick.
Okay. My question goes to academic achievement and the numbers that we are seeing, what you sent us with DRFs, our FAST assessment scores. When does it become concerning? And when do we say we've got to, and it is concerning, not to say it's not concerning, it is. But it's hard to maybe determine what's COVID related, what is virtual. I mean, we can't really decipher out what's causing, I think it's a combination of everything, right? I'll just say that it's not one thing over another. But will we ever get to a point where we're like, okay, this is to a point where we can't handle this in a virtual space. We've got to be back in person because we feel we have just a better handle on connecting with our students in such a different level when we're in person. Is there that kind of threshold?
Well, so first, I would just say that, yes, the data are concerning. There's no two ways about it in my mind. And it was concerning to me before we even started looking at the data from last spring, while we were going through what we were going through last spring. In person is preferable to virtual in almost all cases. And we want to continue to look for ways to do better when we're not able to be in person. But I'm hesitant to say that there's a threshold with achievement that would say no matter what the conditions are, we're going to return them to in person. We're having all these discussions because we're trying to mitigate the harm of COVID, and so saying that if student achievement gets to X point, then no matter what, we got to go back in person. I think is hopefully is a bit of a false choice. So I would say it's concerning now, and we want to continue to look for avenues to improve how we're doing both hybrid and how we're doing virtual, because the data here is not what we want to see, nor what we would have expected to see this time last year. There's no two ways about that. But I would also say that teachers are more strained in doing their best work in person when the conditions in the community are the way that they are right now. So it's kind of the devil's bargain.
Thank you.
Ms. Bradley, will you keep a very tight watch on my 5 minutes? Thank you. Dr. Ahart, the first question that I have is who ensures that our mitigation strategies are being implemented consistently across the district? I know that we oftentimes give buildings some choice about how things are happening, but I feel like this is similar to any type of training we would have around student safety related to building evacuation or lockdown, et cetera. So who is ensuring that this is happening consistently across our district?
Well, the buck first stops at the principal, and then principal supervisors work with our principals to ensure things are happening. And we're hopeful that, if staff see issues, that they're reporting those so that, that things are spot checked and corrected before they become habits. So it's kind of a multi-pronged effort. Certainly, when facilities folks are responding to things, they're reporting out on those things too, so that we can respond to them. I want to stress, I do think, by and large, our staff is doing a really good job with it. This is, returning to in-person 3 weeks ago with our elementary and 2 weeks ago with middle school. A lot of change and a lot of new routines to learn and new habits to build. So there's, I think that will continue to get better as that sort of new way of operation gets ingrained.
Okay, thank you. And those of us who have been classroom teachers know that the strength of those building level or district level expectations are only as strong as the teacher next door is also implementing them. In terms of building wide expectations, that I can be really tight on these, but if any of my colleagues are not, that kind of can make the whole system fall. So I just wanted to make sure we had some strong protocols in place. A lot of my other colleagues have already asked the same questions. I know I was thinking about this prior to receiving a call, I believe, from the same staff member that Mr. Cody and Ms. Sawyer spoke with this afternoon. But I'm going to call this the safety net for lack of a better word. But in our board policy 211, the board outlined that we wanted to see very specific plans related to our most vulnerable students, our ELL students, our special education students, our students that were 2 or more years deficit in ELA and math, and also our pre-K students that we've talked so much about regarding our board goals. And can you tell me where we're at with the work of knowing which of our students need to be in our buildings versus which students we would like to in terms of our equity work around that? Because my understanding prior to swapping models was that there were very few, maybe 200 IEP students in our buildings and like a handful of ELL, but not really any students in the other category of the 2 or more years deficit in ELA or math. Can you kind of tell us where our work is and how quickly, even if we went into virtual, we'd know which students needed to be back in person with us?
Well, yeah, so I don't have an exact number on that right now, but the number of students that we identify and then provide, transportation for in many cases, continues to build. When, at the end of first term, certainly that's going to be a very meaningful check-in point for all of our students and all of our buildings, and being able to more comprehensively identify where there are real issues, and should help us identify who else we need to be bringing back in more frequently for in-person instruction, even if there's not a particular, mandated reason like an IEP or a 504.
Okay, I think I have about another 90 seconds maybe, but what I would like to kind of raise up and bring together, I think, are the thoughts of all of my board colleagues around this issue, that regardless of the modality, we have a high percentage of our students who fall into some sort of at-risk category, whether that is socioeconomic, whether that is academic, whether that's related to ELLs, IEPs. And I think the thing that, from what I'm hearing from board colleagues and what I'm hearing from parents, is that, they're in some sort of position that is making virtual learning next to impossible, and is an impossible stretch based on their family circumstances. I've also heard from parents who have their kids at home virtual that have said, like, yes, I chose this, I knew it'd be hard, but my family can handle this lift. But I don't think that's the case for all of our families across the district, that they can handle that lift, or that their child needs to try to handle that lift. And so I know that this notion might be unpopular, but at what point can our district get to the point where we know which students need to be in school versus which students we want to be in school? And I think that I know that idea of equity is new and pushes it, but I think it, relates to some of the things that I've had, the at-risk coordinator, for example, at one of our high schools brought up to me of, we might be taking chances off of these kids' plates by not allowing them any type of an opportunity to be back into our building. And at what point are we amplifying the discrepancies that I know this board is dedicated to trying to narrow? So I guess the question in there is, at what point do we have that district level data to know what of our kids need that? And we can have in person, even when the rest of our students might need to go virtual.
Well, we're on the verge of having that data now, I would say. And then, then we need to work out how that actually is going to happen, especially with staffing. So certainly not a barrier that can't be overcome. But that's work that
right.
is imminent.
I guess my thinking around this is we put our policy around 2.11 that recommends that the board needs to see plans related to those students. And I'm just wondering what your timeline is to getting pretty concrete plans and how they'll actually be implemented. Because I think we know philosophically where you stand on this, but at what point can we know and say and see this happening in our district? Like, what's our timeline on implementation for that?
Well, I mean, part of that is a function of what modality we're going to be in, if that makes sense. Because when we're shifting where we're serving students and how we're serving students, all that requires also transitioning staff to serving differently. So, we could have plans very rapidly, and then if we change modality, those plans would change again.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think
so
what my
if the board
point
wants a written plan, that certainly can be produced.
Right. I think the point that I'm trying to get at, Tom, is that we have students who are in a position where, regardless of what happens to other students in the district, their plan should never change. That our students on our IEPs, their plan should never change. Our students who are 2 or more years deficit in ELA and math, as outlined, that their plan should never change. And maybe that's a bigger conversation we need to have as a board, but that the board outlined that there were students that are going to be hit at a higher level. And I'm just not confident that we have the safety net in place that we need to support those kids. And I know that I went over my time, and I apologize to my board colleagues for that, but I felt like that was important to ask. So I will ask my board colleagues to open up the floor for any conversations regarding, or any, conversation that will lead us to a motion this evening.
I have a couple things I'd like to follow up on.
Go ahead, Mr. Barron.
Thank you. So along these lines of meeting the needs of specific student populations and maintaining engagement, I know that the state not allowing for athletics participation, if you're in a virtual environment, really kills engagement. Is it possible for us as a district to run an intramural league for high school students even if we're in virtual? Thinking basketball, but I mean indoor soccer, anything really.
That's a good question, and there are some rules that govern that, but I don't know them well enough to be able to. I believe we can, is the short answer, but I don't know all of the particulars in terms of what the athletic association's rules on that are. But I think if it's in season, then we're likely able to do that.
I would be great. I would like us to be as creative as possible in interpreting those rules on the side of our kids, especially in areas where maybe there's not a season for a sport, but there's an opportunity to provide some sort of intramural activity, like I don't know, like an ultimate frisbee or an indoor soccer. Corollary to that question, we've been planning on skills camps, I think at the middle school level for this fall through the end of the year. Would you be able to keep those moving even if we're in a virtual environment?
I can't give you a concrete answer to that. That's something we've discussed but have not landed on a response to that. We also have the Des Moines Park and Rec wanting broader access to our buildings for adult leagues, and we've held off on making that decision for the time being right now too. It's something that we're actively discussing.
Got it. You and I talked over the weekend, and one of the things I brought up was, and I just want to reiterate it for the record for everybody, is this idea. I think that some building staff are reaching out to us because they're worried that they're not aware of all of the cases that are happening in their buildings. And my point to you is, I mean, we've got a lot of fear going on right now. We've got a lot of anxiety. We've got a lot of people that are working in environments that, they're telling us they're not comfortable in. I think, though, we have to maintain, we have to follow privacy rules about identity. I think we can maybe set up some structures so that building leaders are giving some regular updates to their staff about student cases and staff cases and who's in, how many people are on quarantine. And I understand this meeting's about going virtual, but we'll be back in person at some point in time, and coronavirus will still be a part of our lives at that point in time. So if we build those structures out, the sooner the better. Just with that expectation, I think that would be a good thing for the mental well-being of our workforce.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, I'll defer to my colleagues.
Does anyone have anything that might bring us towards a motion of action this evening?
I'm wondering if we can break the recommendation out into multiple motions.
I think that we could do that. I think if you want to make a motion, I think it's the board's pleasure to second and then how they would like to vote on that motion.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to ask that the superintendent applies to the state for a waiver to move to fully virtual instruction.
For K-12?
Yes.
Okay, I just want us to be very specific in our motions. I know that this assumes that what the Dr. Ahart gave us. So we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Martirano. Sorry.
Pre-K.
Oh, yes. We have a motion on the floor from Ms. Martirano. If there's no second, the motion will die on the floor.
Well, confused.
Madam Chair, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
Ms.
Rob.
Oh, I was
Sorry.
just saying, I was going to second Kimberly's motion so that we can move to discussion on it. So,
Is that a second?
yeah,
Mr.
I'm
Barron?
seconding that motion.
Okay,
I'd like
we have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Mr. Barron. I will open the floor to discussion. Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, did you want to start?
Yeah, I do have a question about the waiver. So if we advance the waiver to the state for K-12 to move to virtual, have we met the state's threshold for virtual, or are we still on the cusp of meeting their requirement for virtual?
We've met it for positivity. We're arguably on the cusp for attendance. I'm not exactly sure how they look at attendance.
Other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Bradley. I was just going to say other questions or discussion. Go ahead.
Tom, do we know, have any waivers been granted, in the situation that we're in, since we are at a positivity of 15%, but we're just a little under, the 10% absenteeism? Do you know of any districts that have been granted waivers, just if they're not right there at that point yet?
You know what, I'm not sure. I think there's been 3 or 4 waivers granted, but I don't know what their attendance rates were, but they were certainly at the 15 plus positivity. Good question.
Any other discussion or questions from board colleagues?
Clarification from Tom on the student attendance. I've seen it. I've read a couple of the waivers that were requested, and it's they cite their overall attendance, and then they say that much of that is attributable to COVID, basically. And I've seen them that they seem to cite quarantine as well. And so my question is, what we're reporting on our dashboard is not what we would certify to the state as part of our waiver, because what we're reporting is our absenteeism over and above our average absenteeism on that particular day for the last 2 years. Correct? I mean, what the state's looking for is just what percentage are absent, which is a different number than what we have on our website. Is that right?
That's right.
So, I mean, I would assume if we're at 6.5%, that we're got to be over 10, right? I apologize if that was part of what you had said.
Yeah, we're at I don't have right in front of me our total absenteeism rate, but we would be right in that neighborhood, because what we have on the website is adjusted, so it's above and beyond what we typically have seen on average for that same day the last 2 years.
Okay.
And the state, so sorry, just to piggyback off Rob's clarification. So the state doesn't care necessarily about the adjusted attendance. They care about total attendance or total absenteeism.
Well, it's a little unclear exactly what they look at. I think they want to see at least 10%, and that's tied. That number is tied to some degree of causation from COVID.
Okay.
But I haven't been able to get a clear ironclad response from them on that particular question.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Or it seems like I might be ready to call the vote, but.
Can I just get clarification
from your
colleague? Kim, you made the motion. Your desire was to break it out into different pieces. Your motion that I was glad to second to move to discussion specifically just asked Tom to file a waiver. It didn't put any dates for when we would take action. Can you give your thinking on that?
That is correct. The motion is to just apply for the waiver. It's my understanding that if approved, the state approves waivers 2 weeks at a time.
Correct.
And based on the fact that we would want to give parents notification, we would continue in the current reality until 1, approved, and 2, that appropriate lead time is given to parents and community. So I believe that Tom said Monday would be the start of that 2 weeks if approved. Next Monday, I should clarify, not the 9th, but potentially the 16th.
For K-8, for pre-K-8, it would start a week from tomorrow. For 9-12, it would start this Tuesday.
That was the original intent, yeah.
The motion is not to change the current learning modality as it is laid out. The motion is to file a waiver.
Got it. So what you're seeking is, okay, let's file the waiver, but then you would prefer to have 9-12 start in the building on Tuesday while we wait to see what comes with the waiver.
Correct.
Although theoretically there could be a second motion that would direct Tom to do certain things with the building, with the buildings for this week. All we're voting on is that we're giving Tom the blessing to file the waiver, correct? Okay.
Correct.
Yes, and then I believe Ms. Martrano had asked if we could break down Dr. Ahart's recommendation to multiple motions. So if the board wants to vote on the first part, we can then discuss the second and the subsequent parts that Dr. Ahart brought forward for us this evening. All right, I believe we're all clear on what the motion is. If there are no other questions or discussion around the motion, I would like to call the vote on this motion and then move on to any other action the board would like to take this evening. All right, Ms. Jenkins, can you please call the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
No.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martorano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 6-1. I believe it sounds like there might be some appetite amongst the board to take further action this evening regarding Dr. Ahart's recommendation. I will open the floor to a second motion.
I would like to move that we accept the rest of his recommendation, including delaying the start of high school in-person learning and phasing pre-K-8 back to virtual by the 16th.
Do we have a second for the motion?
I will second Kaylin's motion for the exact same reason I seconded Kim's. I want to have this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Before we move further, Dr. Ahart, you don't outline in your proposal when high school might start. It just says to delay the start. Do you have any idea when we might be delaying that to? Or just a further date in the future?
Yeah, further date in the future. What my hope was is that we could get a waiver and monitor conditions, and if we thought necessary, apply for a second waiver. But I would anticipate at least going through Thanksgiving, given what the current and anticipated conditions are going to be in the community.
Okay, so then that would mean that all of our high school families, in addition to all of our high school teachers, would need to be shifting their plans on less than 48 hours notice.
Yes.
Okay. I believe that was something that you had cited, as well as this board had cited, that we would like to not do to our teachers or our families. So I will open this up to other questions or discussion for my board colleagues.
I have a quick clarifying question. So, Tom, you're directed apply for the waiver. If the waiver is denied, then what? Like, is that what this motion is saying? Like, basically, we just hang out in limbo and until an unknown amount of time that we make a determination later in the future that we don't have date certain at this point?
What I was recommending is that we apply for a waiver, but that we also make the decision to suspend the start of hybrid at high school and to transition to virtual on Monday the 16th, with the hopes that it would be approved by the state. but not necessarily.
And so if we don't get a waiver, again, my question is, when is the date certain for kids to come back into our classrooms?
Well, I wouldn't have a date certain. I certainly wouldn't want to bring them back into the classrooms in worse conditions than when we moved back to virtual, if that makes sense.
Which is kind of like where we are today, because we held off going in person, and now we're in this position of circumstances changed.
Right.
So we don't have date certain of when we can ever guarantee our kids ever setting foot into a classroom again, correct?
Yeah, I guess there are no guarantees, but I would certainly anticipate, hopefully at some point in time, conditions would begin to improve.
And what does improve look like for you?
Well, I've been trying to do a couple of things. One, try to avoid unnecessary harm, and two, using the board's metrics as a guide. So, you know, if case rates came down into and positivity came down into the hybrid area again, then start bringing students back into in-person instruction.
So realistically, that would be sometime in 2021, potentially.
Potentially. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Listen, I mean, here's where my head is at on this one. I think the absolute last thing any society should do when faced with situations like this is close schools, because they impact kids that do not have a voice in this matter. But let's get real here. Like, you know, like I said earlier, the cavalry's not coming. The place is on fire, and no help is going to arrive in the form of any of the other mitigation steps that our community could take, or behavioral changes that people are going to take. And, you know, this is beyond mere circumstances. I mean, this is the metrics that we're following, the ones that we were told are important, have tripled in 3 weeks. There's no sign that peak is lessening, and we're entering what all the public health folks say is the most dangerous time of the year, and they've been right on all of this over and over again. So I understand that we want to know when things are going to change, and I think any parent does right now. But, you know, Tom can't tell us when it's going to change, because he doesn't know when people are going to do the things that they need to do to bring this thing down.
I'll share a little bit. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
I was just going to say that he can't tell us when. I hear what you're saying, Rob, but then I'm also concerned because we're being very predictive as well. And so we're making predictions based off of what we've seen. And I know that we have gone in the direction that some of the people or the experts that have been around us have said. I think my also concern is the decision that we are making is very short right now. We're talking about high school starting on Tuesday, and we're making a decision right now to say, nope, halt that. We're going to do things. And for me, I guess, Tom, my question would be, what kind of disruption does that cause for our students? What kind of disruption does that cause for our staff? I mean, is this an easy transition to just say, hey, we're going to go virtual, so, you know, there won't be any issues? I guess that's concerning for me. So what does that look like?
Well, it's certainly less disruptive at the high school level than the earlier grade levels. You know, the things have changed pretty steadily and in the wrong direction over the course of the last week. And my thinking was that, you know, if time weren't an issue, I would have been recommending pre-K 12 being virtual this week. But I know that we need transition times, especially for our families with younger children. Not to say that it won't be a challenge for high school families and staff, but our high school families tend to have a lot more ability because of the age of the students to navigate a change like this. And certainly our staff, while it's perhaps not most convenient to make a change, I think are pretty well positioned to execute virtually rather than do the return and then potentially turn right back around and go virtual.
So if we, since we've given you permission to go with the waiver, then do you foresee that we would be at an issue? I think about teacher shortage. I know we said, the numbers are going up, but if we waited and just continued in the space that we're in right now while we waited to hear back from the state, what's the approximate time again that it takes for the state to give us a response?
They've said that most times they can act in 24 hours, but I would say 24 to 48 hours would be a very fair expectation.
So then if in 24 to 48 hours, let's just say, I'm just saying we start back in our state where high school would start on the 10th and we'd continue. The state does give us a waiver and they say yes, then would the plan be to then just shut everything down on the 16th? And just do and serve those 2 weeks that we would be off, which part of that would be Thanksgiving break already. So is that how it would flow? I'm just trying to get an idea of the state gives the waiver. Is it a stop immediately or is it just effective the 16th date?
Well, that's a good question. What I was anticipating doing with the first waiver, if all three parts of my recommendation were made, was to immediately apply for a waiver this evening with permission or for approval for high school remaining in the same mode that they're in right now, and the following week have pre-K 8 go into return to virtual. So there would be a week gap, but then correct that over, put in another waiver if conditions still persisted, so that we could get in sync with all levels post Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
I just want to say there's been a lot of, we've heard a couple of times that we're concerned about projecting or assuming or whatever. We don't need to project and assume for one thing. We just need to look at our schools. A couple of days ago, we got an email from one of our middle school principals imploring us to shut it down because she simply couldn't cover classes. There weren't enough adults to run the hybrid model. Like, we're hearing from across the district that classes are covered by people who have other duties. People are teaching their virtual class at the same time they're supervising someone else's class while that teacher teaches virtually because they're in quarantine. Like, talking about projection, this is real. We're not making anything up. We just need to look around. Also, I just need to say again, every single one of these predictions since March has been true. They've all come around. I don't see any reason to start doubting them now, particularly when they say, right around Thanksgiving is going to be another monster spike. So yeah, I don't know. Trust the math is what I would say, and your eyeballs for that matter.
I want to share just a little bit about my thinking. I think the part about Mr. Cody's motion that makes me the most uncomfortable is the amount of lead time that our high school teachers and our high school parents have to make this switch. But that said, that doesn't stop the fact that I continually go back to one of the reasons why I was elected to this board 3 years ago. And it was because one of the things that the community told me that they valued on this board was a teacher's voice. And so I go back to how I'm currently feeling in my role as a teacher and trying to balance all of those things. And one of the things that I'm pretty confident in is the support network that my students have to do virtual. And that's not just related to, socioeconomic in this neighboring suburban rural district, but also just the amount of support from my building, and I'm hoping that our teachers feel that same level of support that they would have to return to virtual. And I've heard a mixed bag from teacher colleagues in Des Moines from the emails that we've been getting. And so I have a really hard time going with that. But I think the space that I come back to is one of the things that the community put trust in me, that they said that they valued, was my voice as a teacher. And currently, when I voted for us to return kids to the classroom, the numbers were looking at a point, and I was feeling comfortable in my classroom with a full roster of students 5 days a week at that point. And at this point, I no longer feel that safety in my own classroom. And I'm hearing that from many colleagues who are also teachers. And so that's where my thinking is at on this, that that we have to have that support net if we're going to go to virtual, but that also that our staff and our, and are not feeling safe. And I think that that's important to reflect, as long as we can be sure that we have that support net that I talked about earlier in place. I would welcome any of my other board colleagues thinking or questions. I would like to try to call this vote here in the next 15 minutes maximum. What other questions or thinking do my board colleagues have?
I just have one more question. And
go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
Thank you. Thinking about the virtual space and knowing that some of those numbers are high for teachers, and I don't know if this is the right time to ask the question, but are we looking at any ways in high school to maybe level some of those numbers out? When I think about a teacher maybe teaching 50 plus kids in a virtual space, or will there be any room for maybe looking at the teacher who's doing virtual and also teaching the kids in the classroom? Is there any wiggle room with that? Are those numbers going to kind of be where they're going to land if teachers are in that virtual space?
If we're functioning in all virtual, there's quite a bit of flexibility in getting those numbers down. When we have our student body split between virtual and hybrid, it becomes a much more complicated equation. So we're always looking at that. I shared some numbers with the board on Friday for class sizes, anticipated class sizes, and for hybrid and high school, and the high end of those is too high for our comfort level. So we're looking at ways that we can get those pared down, and it just takes a lot of moving of the chess pieces to get everything balanced out and still retain all the opportunities that the students want, given the staffing limitations that we have.
And I too, I go with this too, being a former teacher. I definitely, don't like the situation that we're in. Part of me does want to see what the waiver produces and then go from there. Part of me doesn't know what does 2 days more do? Does that do more damage than good? I don't know. I'm very much so looking at everything. So I wanted to be very clear. I see these numbers. I see where things are going. I see the science saying, that things are upticking, but I also have this heavy burden concern of what this does to people who look like me. And everyone can't make that argument and everyone can't say that, but that's where I'm sitting at. I'm looking at this from two different angles. I'm looking at this from a former teacher who doesn't want anything to happen to any of the teachers. And I'm also looking at they are desperately overwhelmed right now, and they're in spaces and places where mitigation may not be the best for them, or where they're not even feeling they're safe. And then on the other end, I'm looking at this from a standpoint of, I've got people who live as a majority district. We can't make any guarantees for them either. And it's just a tough spot to be in, to try to figure that out and not know. And I think the other thing that bothers me is when we talk about going virtual, I really wish we could, and I know I'm asking for the impossible, but it's just like, when could we entertain maybe going back, or when could we try to tick back? I just feel like the idea of possibly being virtual the rest of this year just doesn't sit well with me at all. So I'm I'm erring on the side of seeing what the waiver says so that we can maybe make some decisions from there. I know that this is a hot topic issue that doesn't make our community happy, and there's a lot of anxiousness going on, but I have to just be open and honest and transparent with my board colleagues. That's where my struggle lies. And no matter what decision I make, somebody loses. And that's just where I'm at right now.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Hearing no further questions or discussion, I'm going to ask Ms. Jenkins to call the vote.
Kristen, before she calls the vote.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
Can you just say the motion again, please?
Yes, so I believe the recommendation of Mr. Cody was to accept the superintendent's recommendations on his second two bullets to delay the start of in-person instruction at the high school level and transition preschool, elementary, and middle school to full virtual instruction beginning Monday, November 16th. I believe Dr. Ahart's intention on the first waiver would be to do that through Thanksgiving, if I'm understanding this correctly.
So Kirsten, I just want to get clarity. So for the motion, are we looking at this through Thanksgiving? Are we looking, like, I just want to do this.
So the motion didn't specify, but through clarification from Dr. Ahart, I think we had received that he was thinking the first waiver would go through Thanksgiving, and then the board may look at applying for subsequent waivers. Am I following what your intention was in putting together this recommendation, Dr. Ahart?
The first waiver would not take high school through Thanksgiving, but would take middle school and elementary and pre-K through. So then a second waiver would be applied for that next week before Thanksgiving, and then after Thanksgiving, if we were still in virtual, have those waivers in sync.
Okay, so if I'm looking at my calendar correctly, just for clarification for board colleagues, so we understand the implications of this vote, the waiver for high school would be for November 10th through the 24th, and the waiver for elementary and middle school would be the 16th through the 30th?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or clarification on that prior to calling the vote?
So then Kirsten,
Go ahead.
Kelly.
Because I thought we just voted on, never mind. I thought we had already voted on the waiver, and I thought this was to, regardless of waiver, move our K through 8 to virtual and don't start high school. No?
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess my understanding of that then was that we would reevaluate at the end of that, like whatever that 2-week period would be, but maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, and maybe we should have asked more clarifying questions sooner.
If we could clarify, that would be helpful. And Rob was shaking his head.
Mr. Barron.
All right. So I'm raising my hand. So what Tom emailed us on Friday was a recommendation to apply for a waiver to delay the start of in-person high school for this week. So be in virtual for high school this week, and then plan to transition K-8 and K-8 to virtual starting next week. If we get a waiver, if Tom writes into the waiver virtual for the 2 weeks beginning on the 16th, then all we're basically deciding on right now is, do we want to open the high school buildings for Tuesday through Friday of this week? Because presumably, if we don't get the waiver, then we would be coming back. What I will ask for after we resolve this motion, we'll ask for is that we put a placeholder for a meeting at the end of this week in the event that we do not get the waiver, to make a determination of what we do next week. But really all we're, because the waiver is going to be 2 weeks no matter what, and it's not going to start until the 16th. So really, the waiver would cover those 2 weeks if we get it. All we're really asking for right now, because Tom did not recommend taking K-8, pre-K-8 out of the buildings for this week, all we're really determining right now is, do we want to open the high schools on Tuesday through Friday of this week.
Mr.
Right.
Barron, I appreciate that explanation. Can Mr. Cody clarify his intent in the motion that was made?
My intent was to reunify the recommendation from Dr. Ahart. So yes, I agree with Rob's analysis there. That's what I was ultimately trying to go for.
So what this would mean then would be our 9-12 students would begin term 2 virtually on Tuesday. There wouldn't be like a break period in their instruction. Dr.
I
Ahart?
think, oh,
Right.
Okay, that was my assumption, was that even if they didn't come back in person on Tuesday, they would still receive instruction on Tuesday, just virtually.
Correct.
So then
Okay.
again, this waiver is to delay the start of high school this week.
And a waiver starting for K-8 on Monday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion is for us to basically say that we are going to not start high school this week. It would just be virtually. That's what the motion is, correct?
I mean, it
In
would be
addition to
continue virtually, yeah.
transitioning, in addition to transitioning preschool, elementary, middle school to full virtual starting next Monday.
And okay, so then regardless of waiver, this vote
Exactly.
will delay. Actually, this vote will not start high school in person at all, and will move our K-8 to virtual starting Monday, the 16th. And this has nothing to do with waivers. This is, we are doing this.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Was that your intention, Mr. Cody?
Mhm.
Okay, so yes, so this would delay the start of in-person high school to a date uncertain that's not yet been defined by this motion, and the transition of preschool, elementary, and middle school to full virtual starting Monday, November 16th. That was the motion made by Mr. Cody, the second by Mr. Barron. Is there any further discussion or clarification? All right, if not, Ms. Jenkins, can you please call the vote?
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
No.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
No.
Mr. Cody,
Yes,
Ms. Delagardelle,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
No.
Ms. Sawyer.
No.
Okay, so the effect of this vote then is that we will continue with our plan of high school students returning in person on Tuesday. And we'll continue forward with our pre-K-8 as we have been until another time in person, but we're still asking Dr. Ahart to move forward with a waiver request. So I guess I'm not sure where that puts us in terms of, we've asked Dr. Ahart to go forward with a waiver, but at this time we're just going to continue with our modality plan until we know the outcome of that waiver, and then at which point we would move forward if we would have a waiver to do something different. Am I understanding that correctly?
it puts us in line for thousands and thousands of unnecessary exposures.
Okay, that's not related directly to the motion. So that's the action moving forward. Mr. Barron, go ahead.
That's for a meeting on Friday.
Just say, I mentioned earlier possibility of maybe getting something on the calendar for later this week, and I got a question that might help figure out if we need that or not.
Thank
So
you.
Tom, you're going to submit a waiver tonight. If the waiver is granted, does it need any further action from the board to go into place?
No.
I didn't think so either. So then, we voted 6-1 on the waiver, so we would move forward next week if we got the waiver. I think it's still worth creating a space on our calendar for the latter half of this week in the event that the waiver is denied and we want to consider taking action to move virtual for next week. So my request would be that our board leadership and superintendent have a conversation about that tonight or tomorrow, and look to find a time later this week. And I guess probably like Wednesday, so that we can, if we have to transition, we transition with Tom's preference of making the call on a Wednesday to be ready to go on a Monday. So my request of my board leadership is that we look to find a time and put something on the calendar in the event that we need it, in the event that we do not get the waiver.
Yes, we can discuss that, but I will ask my board colleagues. I also imagine that the bulk of the conversation and deliberation we've needed to have would happen tonight. So Wednesday would really just be a reaffirmation of the vote that we just took, which was basically a motion that carried 3-4 to not move forward without a waiver. So I'm not actually entirely sure that we would need to meet again, because I think the board just spoke on that. However, what I would say is Dr. Ahart could bring forward another motion at our next regularly scheduled board meeting, which would happen on Tuesday the 17th. So really, so if we have the waiver, we know what's going to happen. If we don't have the waiver, the board already voted on what would happen. So we would have another opportunity, or Dr. Ahart, I guess, would have another opportunity to bring forward a recommendation regarding modality on our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is the 17th. Is the way that I'm understanding the vote that just happened. So I'm not sure if we would need to meet again later this week, but I will do what I need to do on behalf of the board with Dr. Ahart.
That's a fair way of looking at it. I guess the only caveat that I would say is that we voted 6-1 to advance a waiver that would have us not teaching in the building starting next week. And if we do not get the waiver, it's fair to still question whether 6 members of the board feel that teaching in the buildings next week is appropriate. But I think your evaluation of what just happened with the last vote is fair. And so I'll put my trust in your hands on that one.
Well, and I guess I'd like to hear from other board colleagues. We had 3 members of this board who are in that 3 that voted for a waiver, but not to return, which the motion seemed to be without one. So I guess I would leave that up to Ms. Bradley, Ms. Martirano, or Ms. Sawyer if they feel we need to reevaluate this if we don't have the waiver. And I suppose I could leave that to a conversation with my vice chair following this meeting as well.
Yeah, Kirsten, if we talked after the meeting, that would be fine.
Okay, unless Ms. Martirano or Ms. Sawyer has another preference, or Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
To be honest with you, since we already have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, I'm not for sure that there's the necessity for a meeting immediately, and we can evaluate the outcome of the waiver request at our regularly scheduled meeting and how, or if we wish to proceed, or what that looks like. That would be my preference.
Okay, well, absent any objection from Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer, Ms. Bradley, Ms. Bradley and I can touch base after this, but I think what I'm interpreting from the way the board voted this evening in this conversation that we just had, I think the board would be okay with reevaluating this, or our superintendent coming forward with a new recommendation on the 17th. Okay. Without any other business before us, I will adjourn this special meeting for Sunday, November 8th at 7:04 p.m. Thank you, board colleagues, for your clearing your schedules to make this happen this evening, and also thank you to our community for the attention that you pay and the emails and the phone calls that we've received to help push our thinking on this issue. I appreciate every single one of you and your emails, as I know my board colleagues do, even though I didn't get a chance to respond to. I think I had 142 emails since yesterday. So thank you so much, everyone. So have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good meeting.